Verstappen that wins out. He takes victory in the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, and Charles Leclerc comes home in second place. It's a Ferrari double on the podium as Carlos Sainz manages to take third.
What's up, guys? X Ricci here, bringing you another F1 podcast. Today, it is, what day is it today, actually? Oh, it is Monday, March 28th, and it's a day after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. I am your host, X Ricci, joined by my two awesome co-hosts, Andrew and Erica. Hey, guys.
How's it going?
What's up, y'all?
No complaints over here. But also just wanted to make an announcement. We are on Spotify and it is great. So I just want to give a shout out to the customer service team at Spotify and Podbean for helping me out. And now we're live. So make sure to follow us on Spotify. We are on Instagram at the F1.podcast and also Apple Podcast and on my YouTube channel too. To say that we pick a sport filled with excitement. I think it's no secret that this weekend in Saudi Arabia Grand Prix, a lot has happened. To start, we want to congratulate Max Verstappen for winning his first race of the season. Ferrari securing P2 and P3. Checo being able to getting P4. But also just a couple of other comments to say, good to see that Mick Schumacher he's walking from his crash in practice. I don't know if any of you guys saw that. It was pretty scary. Anytime somebody goes into the wall like that and needs medical attention, it gives a little shakes. So
the damage was worse than what the good news is, I guess, with the new regulations on cars, they took they're supposed to withstand 15% more energy because of the crash that Roman had in Bahrain in 2020. So they do design in the regs, supposed to withstand up to 15% more energy in crashes. So even though the car literally kind of like broke in half, it was just completely totaled. It was a big safety thing for Mick, and you can see afterwards he was fine. I think they had to cut him out of his seat, but I think he was just stuck in there from all the carnage that was the car. But he was fine. He was talking the next day, and he was walking around the paddock. So really happy to see that, again, the F1 taking safety to it, or the FIA taking safety as the utmost importance in the car, at least.
Yeah, it was definitely a little scary. I think everyone was very worried when they saw that crash happen. I mean, we know that those high-speed corners and just this circuit in general is rife with potential issues for a lot of drivers. So glad to see that he went to the hospital, got checked out, everything was okay. So best wishes, and hopefully we see a speedy, racy looking Mick in Australia.
And just want to add to that, Andrew, wasn't it the F2 race literally had 10 laps of it under the safety car?
Oh my God, yeah. So
I think this is probably the dangerous track on circuit. No,
this is definitely the dangerous track on circuit, just because of all the high speed corners. And there was the first 13 laps of the sprint race, or 14, 11 of them were under safety car, because you think they haven't made a service road around that goes around the entire track yet, apparently. So it took like 5 minutes where the car accidents were to take, to get the crane there, pick up the cars, take it out, clear the track to be safe. So again, that just added a bunch of time. And there was actually, they may have not had finished. They were threatening to not finish the sprint race because of the time slot. They only have 45 minutes to race. So they can keep the weekend going, and they were pushing that 45-minute time bound. But luckily enough, they got in all the laps in both the sprint and feature race. Some quality racing, if I do say, though, on the F2 side. It was a joy to watch that this weekend, and look to see the future of F1 and some of these drivers. I think it's going to be quite interesting come down the line.
Yeah, and Erica, anything stood out for you on practice or at the race? I think for me, it was seeing the interesting battle between the Alpine drivers, just going toe to toe, and no real team orders in the middle of it, which was kind of exciting. But I think it was obviously not the greatest of weekends for McLaren, but at least, Lando got into the points, and hopefully that is a positive moving into Australia next week.
Yeah, it seems like some progress moving in the right direction. Having Lando up in the points and a better quality than I was expecting after what we saw in Bahrain last week. Seems like whatever kind of improvements they're making are a step in the right direction. So I'm hopeful that we have a reliable car for Daniel, because that was really unfortunate. Didn't even make it all the way to the paddock. He got stuck at the entrance of the pit lane, which was super unfortunate in the race. And then we just had a whole bunch of holdups going on there. It was the most chaotic pit lane entry I have seen in a very long time, if ever. So, you know what? Hopefully they're able to kind of build on that momentum, figure out what went wrong here, continue to make adjustments as they have been doing on this car between testing the first race and now, and they're able to get a little bit more downforce in the car, because I know Lando was saying that was one of the issues holding them back from having that really high performance, so that they can get a little bit more speed and endurance and reliability out of it.
Yeah, it was a stupid amount of people that DNF this weekend due to car reliability issues. It was ridiculous. Like in 30 seconds, we had 3 people drop like flies. Apparently Bottas had a overheating engine issue that if he kept going, it was going to pretty much ruin races down the road. So they cut him off. And then Alonso and Ricardo just lost power and tried to get him back to the pit lane, which kind of screwed over Hamilton in a way, because there was some confusion on whether or not he could have pit or not during that, because they hadn't closed it yet. Unfortunately, he didn't pit, and that kind of ruined his race to that point, because he had to box later, and then good for him to fight back into 10th, which Lewis, you do get a point for. I know that was a little bit confusion on the team radio afterwards, but you do get a point for 10th.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. A few people did manage to sneak into the pit lane before they closed it at that point in time. I think both Magnussen and Hulkenberg did. But, unfortunate if you were at a different point in your lap and you were hoping to pit and lost that when they closed the pit lane entry. I mean, obviously a good call, because you don't want drivers running around in the pit lane entry and these vehicles kind of blocking the way. But it was just a bizarre weekend for Lewis, from not managing to get out of Q1 to how difficult he seemed to have making any kind of move up the grid. I mean, we've seen Lewis start further back when there's been an engine penalty or something like that, but we haven't seen him in this kind of dire strait, I would say, with a Mercedes that's not performing how we'd expect, and then try to fight his way to the front of a grid.
First time since Brazil.
Go ahead. Yeah.
2017.
I was literally about to say that.
Yeah. First time since Brazil 2017 before he made a Q1. And it was really weird, because Russell found just the best window possible to have that car and to get to start P6. And like having Lewis start literally P16, not out qualified by Stroll of all people. Shout out Stroll. It was quite humbling to watch if you're a Mercedes fan, because we were always thinking, Mercedes are sandbagging, they're sandbagging this year like they have every other year. That's not the case. Like they are clearly slow on the track, and this can be shown by Russell's difference between Perez. He was 22 seconds back of Perez when he finished P5. And Hamilton was fending off a Haas. Magnussen was, they were having some good racing back there. Like, and kudos to Hamilton for turning it around and getting that point. I think the DNFs definitely had something to play in there. But again, we see 14th, 13th, 12th, the last places that based on classification outside people DNFing were all Mercedes run cars.
It's like, what's going on, man?
I don't think they have a good engine right now. I think they're still trying to process that engine, because if it's not everyone has everyone's different aerodynamics. You can't blame it on aerodynamics. The one constant that these teams have is that it's the power unit. And the power unit is it's not good right now, but Mercedes are going to figure that out for sure. But yeah, you saw like Ricardo, right? His engine cut out, reliability issue right there. And just, there's tough times in Mercedes right now, but again, they're an 8-time constructors championship for a reason, and they've had a dominant power unit ever, since the hybrid area came back in 2014. So I think they'll be okay growing forward. It's just there's a little bit of growing pains right now for that team.
Yeah, and I think I would just want to add there is, especially since we have about this week is going to be a break when they get to go back to Australia. I think for the first time since 2020, because they've not been able to race there since the pandemic. So that'll be kind of nice to go see what goes on in Australia. But another driver I just want to compliment is obviously Haas for the second straight race is able to pull out points. So Günther Steiner and Kevin Magnussen looking good. And obviously with mixed crash, they didn't put him up to race on Sunday. Also, I don't think they could have turned the car around too. But yeah, no, things are looking good over at Haas. Obviously some interesting comments coming out of them after the race. And I'm curious to see where they place in the midfield. Obviously I have high hopes for them, but also, I know Erica, you mentioned about pit strategies. The fun fakeroo that Ferrari did on Sergio Perez was quite interesting to see. And I mean, it kind of it's unlucky because it worked, and then we got safety car, and then it kind of ruined Sergio Perez's race.
Yeah, Latifi giveth and Latifi taketh away.
I mean, there was a great meme that came out of it where, they're showing Perez. I forget what movie it is, but usually it's James Franco or whatever, first time. And so Perez being like, Latifi ruined my pit strategy and I lost my advantage first time with Lewis Hamilton there. And I feel like that's the way to sum it up. I mean, that was absolutely wild. But the pit lane in general was a bit of a mess because obviously there was the fake out and that kind of altered people's strategy. We had the people whose cars completely gave out on them at the pit lane entry. But wasn't there a scenario as well where there was an unsafe release or something and we almost had two cars collide with each other and there was some invested and then someone didn't serve up. I think it was Joe didn't serve his penalty properly on one of his stops.
Yeah, the pit lane was a complete mess. It was a complete mess this week.
It was literally like a parking lot in a sense.
First, in the first race, we had the slowest pit stops we've seen in years. And then now we just have Fury Road taking place in this one stretch that's not supposed to be that crazy. I mean, I'm so confused by what's happened. It's like everyone has just kind of forgotten their jobs and what they've done for the last few years.
So Perez illegally passed Sainz when he was coming out,
right.
And that required Perez to give back the position to Sainz because if you watch the replay, Sainz literally almost got put in the walls. In the words of Fernando Alonso, "Got to give me the space," or
you have to leave it the space.
Yes,
all the time you have to leave it the space.
Okay, he pushed me off the track. I think you have to leave the space. All the time you have to leave the space.
But yeah, it was good, and we saw some really great race fighting towards the end of the race with Leclerc and Verstappen. I mean,
2 weeks in a row. That's been some really exciting jockeying for P1 that we've seen between those two drivers.
And it's not even like it's just hard racing between the two of them. It's quite tactical too, because we've had back-to-back weeks where two DRS zones are quite close to each other, and the battle between like the one point where they started playing DRS chicken around the final corner where it was like, Max, no, you take it. And Charles like, no, you take it. And then Max like, no, you take the line first. And then I think Max ended up being worse off because he locked up on that point. In the end, it didn't matter. But I'm liking, compared to last year, Max and Lewis was a lot of elbows out racing, hard impact racing, getting at each other, which created a lot of crashes. What I like to see about Max and Charles is that it's a totally new style of racing in the sense that it's very tactical in how they approach. And Charles is a very smart driver out there. He knows Max's strengths. He knows Max kind of overall game plan when it comes to, if Max if he finds an opening, he's going to go for it. Right. And sometimes
he's not afraid. He's not afraid. He's not afraid.
Which is good under the old car, but with these new cars that allow you to race closer depending on the tires, I think you're going to have to see a lot of more those tactical pushes going through. And yeah, Max won round 2 of this, but man, 23 rounds, Max versus Charles. This is going to be an epic season.
As also just a couple of things, but this is the 3rd straight podium for Carlos Sainz. I think he's got the longest driver point streak right now in Formula One. I think it's at 17 races and counting. And you can even tell, like, even he got on a podium today, but he was still visibly frustrated because he clearly wants to go faster. And I think he's still trying to learn that car. I think it's this, I don't know if it's the engine or but you can tell visually frustrated that he knows he's there that close to put the pressure on Charles. But I mean, I think Ferrari's looking pretty good after 2 races.
It's always tough when because he's finishing like 7.5 seconds behind his teammate. Right. Yeah, quite a bit. And I know you're trying to defend off Checo coming from behind you, but you want to at least try and close the gap up as much as possible to your teammate. When coming from, because it's starting to, last year there was kind of a bit of a mix between who was 1 or 2. People were thinking, oh, Carlos is going to be 1, driver number 1 this season. I think we're starting to see that it's going to be Charles is 1, Carlos is 2. After this, again, it's only 2 races in, but the way they've been fighting, or driving out on track, I would say it's Charles versus Max. And this is going to be turned into an absolute electric. It's going to be an electric season, put it that way.
I think it was very interesting to see. There's some really interesting angles that they're able to capture on the cameras at this particular circuit. And you could even see, I think it was an EP.3, they're able to really zoom in and you see the drivers coming around one corner pretty tight up on their faces. And you can see who's more relaxed and feels comfortable in the car and who's really fighting in order to stay on the racing line as they're going around. And so you see some of the more experienced guys or, the drivers that everyone kind of looks to the forefront seeming a little bit more relaxed. And, between Charles and between Sainz, everyone was kind of, pointing out that Sainz's eyes were completely bug-eyed out of his head coming around this turn, whereas a lot of other people, were a little more relaxed coming out of that. So I'm curious if part of it is just his own comfort with the circuits and trying to get like a little bit more familiar with them and familiar with the car on them, because he has said he does need to pull out more from it, which you're correct about. But I'm wondering if part of it is just his own confidence and his driving ability on some of these circuits.
Yeah, I think that's also interesting. And then I think Pierre Gasly, like within the last 10 laps, his neck was really killing him. And I don't know if there was a car issue or if that's just the stress of like some of the newer drivers versus some of the experience. But this is going to be a long season, and if I wants to do more races, we can get more into that later. It'll be interesting to see how some of these, if they can even go the full season, or if like they need to sit down or retire a race, or vice versa. So I'd be interested to see that. Sorry, Andrew, did you want to pipe in with something there?
No, we'll talk about it. I have my thoughts on the ridiculousness of 30 races, but.
So I think that gets us into our next section then. So do we want to, I think we want to start off with that first question. Unless there was anything else from the race that I think we've covered everything. Andrew.
Yeah. Like I can't think of it, like the race overall. I hope we continue to see more of this. I think, there's a couple of questions about Mercedes and the fan questions that we'll get to that kind of tie into the race. As well, but I think Mick's going to come back and get his first points of the season in Australia. That's kind of like my prediction.
I'm the one thing I will say, just as we're leading into talking about the possibility of 30 races, you're talking about how Gasly was complaining about his neck on the last few laps, and I don't know if you heard about Magnussen, but his neck was basically being held together with tape before the race. He had been complaining during practice and quali about it. He had a lot of work done on the physio table and stuff in between the two. And when some of the commentators were in the paddock ahead of the race, they noticed that, especially on one side of his neck, there were about like 8 pieces of tape in place in order to help stabilize it. So, like we've said, this isn't the safest track and there's a lot of high-speed corners. And obviously that puts a lot of stress on a driver when they're behind the car. So I'm curious to see if, if we've got more circuits that have the same kind of, layout or work done to them that we've seen in Jeddah. Maybe it'll be too difficult on the drivers, because quite frankly, extending it by 7 more races would be a lot more additional strain on a person than they're used to. And that's not something that I think is easy to build up the endurance for. If that was something that they did eventually all agree that they wanted to do.
He also suffered from like an acute intestine attack within the final 15 minutes of the race. I don't know if you heard his driver radio. No, Gasly.
Oh my gosh.
He had to battle through some bad intestine pain for the last like 10, 15 laps of the race. He said it felt like he was just getting stabbed every left corner he was taking. So I think he went to the doctor. I hope he's checked out and everything's okay from that end going forward.
Yeah,
he was.
If you heard the
race, he had an ultrasound and he was flipping off the camera, so at least he was in good spirits.
I love how F1 does post on their YouTube channel the post races, because you can hear him like visually frustrated and struggling to talk about that. But I think we want to address the elephant in the room is there's reports for next season that they're going to add. We'll go right into these questions, and I think it's very clear where we're kind of stand on this, but we'll have a bigger discussion on this. That the FIA wants to add more races, and I don't know if this is going to be more of an excitement because of just how much the sport has grown because of the Drive to Survive Netflix series. Or trying to capture some of these markets, but there's potentially going to be a Las Vegas Grand Prix next year.
China.
a China race. So yeah, I guess what our people's thoughts are. I'll start here. This is the problem that I think. You try to ride the wave and you don't want to ride it so much. There has to be a healthy balance. And like, I follow one photographer on Instagram, and he said that he has been away from his house last season, 283 days, I think it was. And I also think like if you're going to go to Las Vegas, like where are you going to race? Because if you guys don't remember, but Las Vegas had an F1 race. I think it was 1982. They literally raced in the parking lot of Caesar's Palace.
Yeah, it's kind of like built up around there now, I think.
Just a tad,
I think, right?
The Bellagio's like, I think across the corner. I think there's an MGM Grand down the street. Oh, there's a couple of, I think they call them hotels.
Yeah, casinos.
Something like that. I don't know.
Like that.
Stuff the city might be known for.
And just want to add that season in 1982, this Las Vegas Grand Prix was the final race to determine who the champion was.
Jeez.
So, yeah, I guess I'll open it up to you guys, but I very caution the FIA here. I think it would be a very stupid decision. I think obviously after this weekend, some issues that have come up, I think they need to personally revisit some of the tracks that we're already going to now. Instead of kind of expanding more, but I'll leave it open. Whoever wants to go first. What's up, guys? It's Richie here. Just wanted to jump in and do a quick break from the pod, and just want to say a big thank you to everybody who's been supporting us thus far. We've been blown away by the amount of support we've received, especially in the last 2 weeks. And our move to Spotify has really gave us another platform to really introduce our content to. We've noticed that the last 2 weeks in particular, viewership, subscribers, and fans have all gone up. So we really appreciate it. And as I always said, this project is fueled by the fans, and we really appreciate everything. So make sure to hit that subscribe button on all of our social media channels, whether if it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Twitch. I think I have all of them there, but we really appreciate it. Anyways, enough of me talking. Let's get right into the rest of the pod. Thanks, guys.
I think at one point last year they were floating around 25, and even at that, a lot of people were not on board. You think about the amount of time it takes people to set things up ahead of a race, complete the race, pack it up, move on to the next location. It's an absurd amount of time to be away from your friends and family. Some people are quick to point out that they do get a break mid-season in the summer. Yeah, there's an off season, but think about the seasons for other professional sports. You're on the road a lot, but you're not going all across the globe like this. Like you're in the NHL, you're pretty well in the, unless there's like, or even the NFL now, they're doing a couple international games, but it's like 1 or 2 a year, and otherwise you're in the States. So it's a lot to ask of people to put their lives on hold. And I think there's a few guys in the paddock who have even said like, I'll kiss, like, cool, if we do 30 races, guess I'm kissing my marriage goodbye, because there's no way that's going to hold up. And I think it's just going to be too much of a physical toll on everyone, not just the drivers who will be racing in 7 more races than they are this season, but like it's very physical work to be someone who's part of a pit crew or to be someone who's working on these cars behind the scenes as well. Like it's just imagine trying to get the cars to last for 7 more races when we've seen sometimes that they're kind of limping through to the finish line towards the back end of the season. It would, I think, be a little bit too difficult to manage.
Yeah, I'm going to echo your thoughts here in the sense that it's just a complete money grab at this point. Like Massey did last year, Dominicali starting to see, bags of money start flipping in his head, right? In terms of wanting to grow the sport. But the problem is, where are you going to put the other 7 races? Like, don't you think I think one in Africa would be kind of cool, right? Because then you kind of tackle all the continents that you can race at, right?
Well, and they used to do that too. And Lewis has been an advocate for the track to come back because he said that it's a brilliant one to race at.
Yeah, and that's fine. But 30, as you mentioned, Erica, like there are mechanics that work at the track 5-6 days a week. They have to right as soon as the race ends, start taking everything down. And it's not even like it's not even the paddock. It's like the mobile homes that are like all modular built together that got to be taken down too and shipped over to the next place they're going. Oh yeah, and by the way, we're not going like from one state to another state. We're going like across the world for some of these races, right? So they have to fly, and then they got to set up everything before the team bosses get there on say Tuesday or Wednesday, and then they're there for the race. So you're there like 5-6 days a week. Imagine having 30 races. Yeah, exactly. Kiss your marriage goodbye. There's no way you have free time to spend. And a 2-week, like a 4-week break. Ooh, 2 of them you can't do. 2 of them is like you legally cannot do anything based on FAA. But then the remaining 2 weeks, I'm sure you're back in the factory working, getting prepped for the next race. But I think 30 races is stupid. And it also I don't think any driver's going to want to run 30 races, and that's the result. You're going to have driver substitutions. And what's the point of a World Drivers' Championship at this point? So
yeah, if you've got a substitute, like
I get NASCAR can do it in the US because it's in the US.
Yeah.
You're staying in the confines of one country. Maybe you're going to Mexico, farthest south you go. And yeah, I think there's about 30 some odd races in NASCAR, but it's all in one country. We're going to like continents here, not country, continents. And it's just, I like the exclusivity at some points in terms of 23 races. I think it makes it worth more to the sport to have that. And if people are going to complain about the off-season length, I think they just need to take a look in the mirror and be like, do you ever complain about the NFL off-season length? They play 20 weeks of the year. 21 weeks of the year. Like half the season are an off season. But no one complains about that. I just think, again, Richie, as you mentioned, they're trying to Americanize the sport based on the experience, on the success they have with Drive to Survive. And I think a race in Vegas is cool. I think a race in Africa would be cool, but that's it. 25 max, that's it.
It needs
the
to be
schedule's
practical.
Already bogged down enough.
And like if they have to review some certain tracks and just say, you know what, we thought about doing the 25 to 30 and then we realized like this is not going to work out, like then like there may be some certain races on the track that maybe should not be part of it anymore. And
well, who knows? Like Russia's going to be open up, I think, this year, and I probably for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So I think that's an opening that you could put down into it, right? So yeah, I think 25 maximum is kind of like the way to go. I don't think any driver wants to drive 25 races in a season. They got lives too,
Yeah,
outside of work.
For me, what I find interesting too is Formula One really sees themselves as a big force for change in some of the places that they come to. Like, even if they're not directly political, someone's looking at the countries they go to, it shines a light on some of the issues they have. But I think at a certain point, especially as the sport grows in popularity, you're going to have people start questioning why there are races in some of the places that they are racing, without calling out anyone specifically or like any country specifically. Some of the places that they're considering racing down the road, I'd be raising an eyebrow, especially as we are seeing drivers kind of take a more political involved stance towards a lot of things. Like, I'm sure if they choose to race in certain places with iffy track records, we're going to see Sebastian Vettel speaking up, because hands down, something that he would do, like he was saying ahead of Sochi, ahead of them kind of pulling that race, saying like, I'm not going to Russia if that's staying on the track this year. So I'm curious to see kind of when there would be that fracturing of relationships between doing what's a lot of people would consider to be right, and then doing what F1 thinks is right.
Well, we saw that this weekend.
And we saw that this weekend with some questionable things happening at facilities not all that far from the track. So
I think it's really important that we have to keep in mind that there are a lot of factors that go into that decision, right? It's not just from a social perspective. There's an economic perspective as well that we've been discussing that has to go into these decisions. And what I really applaud from the driver's side is being able to be united in that case, to have that conversation, right? Because we need to have these conversations more and more every day so that we can become more aware, learn, and be more educated on these topics, right? And that's why it's great to see that the drivers took initiative to have this kind of conversation. They were assured that that was the safest place to drive this weekend, and they went forward with the drive. But again, it had to have that conversation to provide that assurance. And as long as the drivers felt safe and they felt the safety of everybody else was fine, I'm okay with their decision, because again, I'm not in that room. I can't make that decision for them. But I really truly applaud the fact that they were able to come as a unified team together from, the 10 different teams into one to be able to have this conversation.
Mm-hmm. And I think just one thing to add, because I didn't mention it early on, Sebastian Vettel did not race for a second straight week due to a COVID positive test, and he was not been able to make another negative test in time for the race. So I think Aston Martin, I'm looking to you, Andrew. I think they just didn't want to risk it, so they raced Nico Hülkenberg again this week, and hopefully, fingers crossed, Vettel gets back for Australia Grand Prix.
Look,
Sorry, I just looked at
Nico
my
had
notes.
fun. Nico had fun. That's all we can ask. Again, there's a lot of things that have to go on with that team to really be able to compete. Albon's going to get a 3-place grid penalty in Australia for his contact with Stroll. So that's one thing to look at. But again, hey, it's early in the season. Aston Martin fans, we were promised a lot. I get it, but we have to just remain okay. Trust the process.
Yeah, trust the process. I love it, Andrew. All right, so we'll go into the next question. So we had a comment on YouTube from Graham, and he asked us any thoughts on Red Bull's miscalculation fuel consumption and not a fuel system failure. Aren't all teams using the same fuel pumps? I mean, they won the race, so I think they were able to figure it out. But obviously, there was a little bit more behind that. And did you want to take a first stab of this one, Andrew?
Yeah. So yeah, I think they're all supplied the same fuel pump by the FIA. I think there was more of a fuel transfer issue that they defined it, and they couldn't really figure it out if they fixed it until they ran a full race, and clearly they finished first and fourth. So I think the issue is cleared up, thankfully. And going forward, again, as we mentioned on the last pod, they had that week to figure it out, and they did, which is great to see. So I think Red Bull is going to be strong, and their straight line speed is unbelievable. It is a rocket ship going down a straight.
Can't argue with that one. I just hope that this kind of keeps going into Australia. I know. I think it'll be interesting to see how Mercedes responds next week. Like, I think they can have some sort of win with like Russell coming up for 5th and able to pull his car out. And like, I don't know, Lewis looked really down after the race. So I just could only imagine how the camp's feeling back at Mercedes. So
I'm also curious to see 2 things. One, is McLaren going to be able to build on the momentum of this week in terms of moving the car in the right direction? But also AlphaTauri, 2nd race in a row where we've had an issue with the car. Yuki Tsunoda on the way to the grid on Sunday having what I believe someone said was a powertrain issue where that just kind of gave out on him. So, we had Gasly's car spontaneously combust last week, and now we've had Yuki with the issue here. So kind of, curious if they're going to sort it out. Clearly Red Bull, corrected for their errors after the first week, but still some issues going on their development team. So we'll see what's what.
Yeah, I think those are some good comments. And I'm kind of just wondering in terms of fantasy, like where do you put your eggs in your basket here? Personally, like I don't feel comfortable with the Williams team right now. So if you're kind of looking for someone on that bottom, I would try to avoid either an Albon or an Latifi. And if you have Latifi and you can take that risk and you've won money somewhere else, I probably would drop him. I'm also curious to see if Mick Schumacher can bounce back after this week's incident. So maybe that's a good pickup since he's not even that expensive. But also, do you try to maximize Ferrari if you can, if you have room in the constructors? So,
yeah, I think my approach for fantasy is to whoever is powered by a Red Bull car, a Red Bull powertrain, or a Ferrari powertrain, I'm going to have them on my team. But may want to hold off on AlphaTauri right now just because we don't know, they haven't sorted out their fuel issues or their car issues yet in terms of reliability. But it seems to me that the Ferrari engines are the most competitive this year so far. And I would say for the first part of the season, I would try to put an all Ferrari lineup, or put an RB team with a couple RB guys on there as well.
Yeah, that's paying off in spades for me right now. I know obviously Ricci's probably looking at my lineup and being like, what are you talking about? But Andrew and I, using both the F1 app and Grid Rival, I don't know about you, but I've got like different teams going on each one to like mix it up and keep it kind of fresh. But yeah, I agree with you, Andrew. It's the Ferrari. If you can go triple Ferrari at all is kind of the way to be. And then fill her in with some Haas and some Red Bull.
Yeah, I would also argue, like, I feel like Bottas can bounce back here. So I'm going to double points him ahead of Australia. Fingers crossed. It might kind of bite me in the back because Magnussen's also driving really well. So like if you have to do one of those bottom drivers, I probably would recommend either of those two. I probably would avoid Yuki, sorry. Just given what's going on, I wouldn't even trust that car right now.
I'm going to argue and say, well, I'm not arguing. I'm going to make a comment. I'm going to turbo Charles ahead of the next round because there's a lot more turns, or not less straight line speed required in Australia. I don't think there's a lot of like curves and turns and whatnot with some short line sprints. I know they've redone the track a little bit to make it a little bit more driver friendly in terms of overtaking and whatnot. But I think Ferrari are going to have a good round in Australia coming up. So double pointing or turboing Leclerc.
I did that this week and it paid off handsomely. So gonna second that call.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Exactly.
2 weeks in, I think we're the fantasy standings is looking pretty tight. I'm first, obviously, at 2,059.
Okay.
Second with Erica at 1,966, and then Andrew at third at 1,864. Did I say 19,000?
I think you might have. I'm at 1966. It'd be sweet if I had 19,000 points already.
I
That
got
would
hit
be
by the DNF bug. I got Will slapped by the DNF this weekend.
I walked away from the TV for 10 minutes and like I just saw half the grid basically DNF. I was like, what's going on?
I have to say, so I was telling Richie and Andrew ahead of time, but for people wondering, I was in the car driving back from Northern Ontario, so I could not watch the race. I had to listen to it. And that is an experience that I recommend doing at least once because they paint a nice word picture, but even still, you don't really quite understand the level of carnage until you can see what it looks like up close and personal.
Yeah, I also, it's great using the F1 app because especially you can hear the radio. I'd be curious to know going into next week. I might just go back to F1, but I like if you ever go to a race, I wonder, do people just listen to the radio in a headphone if they can't able to watch it? Like, I don't know if Erica, anybody that's been to races.
For what I've seen, they have like the feed live in like the stands with Crofty or the commentary going on as they're racing around the track.
Yeah, it's interesting if you're not in a grandstand though. So I had a few friends that went to Austin this past October and you're kind of just on a lawn somewhere around a track. So that's not necessarily set up with full speaker and everything. So in those cases, if you're not close, you might know that the commentary is going on, but between the echo and reverb and all kinds of stuff, it's not going to be super clear. But it's definitely something that you can still pick up on, but I don't think you would hear the radio to the same degree. You could on ESPN. It was honestly from an audio standpoint very similar to watching the race live, where they would pause to listen in on the radios and stuff, and that's when we heard Charles with his little fake out to Ferrari, which got them to pit Checo. But yeah, it was. I'm kind of curious and excited to see what happens.
Yeah, and I think we're in set for a fun Australia. Like, I'm really excited we get to go back. We didn't get to experience that race in 2020 as the world started to respond to
They
COVID.
were there.
Yep.
They were there. They had to leave though.
I don't even remember in Drive to Survive. I think they just did one. Was it one practice and then it just got all cut?
Yeah.
So on that note, I am going to end the pod here, and I think this has been a fun week, and I think we had a lot of good discussions. And regardless of what happened in Saudi Arabia, I think we did see some fine racing, and I think we have a week, nice little break, and then we'll get right back into it on Sunday, April 10th at the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne. My name is Richie. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Follow us on Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and my YouTube page, with obviously my two amazing co-hosts, Andrew and Erica.
Thanks everybody for listening.
Peace out, y'all.
And I'll go. Oh, sorry, I totally took your spotlight.
No worries.
Andrew.
That's okay. Everyone, thank you so much for watching, listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow us on Instagram, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, and follow Richie on YouTube for more amazing content. Hope to hear from you soon. Have a great day.